When a wealthy, handsome young man got a car as a graduation present, he soon went on to use this car to end lives. Due to his good looks, however, he received an outcry of support on social media. It isn't often that a killer becomes somewhat of a living meme and gains a huge outcry of support online, but it does happen from time to time. We've seen it before when some certain handsome-faced criminals' mugshots get posted online, but it isn't too often that people are driven to such obsession that they're willing to dedicate a huge portion of their life to advocating for this criminal that they've never even met. Well, this is one of those weird cases where it happened. Our story begins with Chris and Cheryl Herrin, a young couple who got married in the state of Texas. This is where they had their first child in 1997, Tristan, and shortly after in 1999 they had their second, Cameron. The young, wealthy family spent the majority of the kids' childhood living in Texas, while Chris worked as a videographer and editor and Cheryl worked as an insurance executive. In 2005, though, the family decided to pack up and move out to Florida, South Tampa specifically. There, Chris continued his work, while Cheryl eventually retired from her job as an executive. By now, the family had a massive amount of wealth already, after all. They were able to buy a massive Mediterranean-style home at the West Gardner Court in the Ballast Point neighborhood of South Tampa. The place had 5 bedrooms, 5.5 bathrooms, and a massive amount of open space. As it turns out, they paid roughly $1.4 million for this place. Chris continued to work as a videographer, specializing in corporate video presentations. However, by this point he was dialing back the work in order to spend more time focusing on raising his sons. Cameron was put into the Tampa Catholic High School. Cameron, along with his brother, seemed to be the ideal young men to casual observers. They often volunteered to do lawn mowing and weed trimming for their neighbors. They seemed very cheerful, enjoying the outdoors in particular. Cameron was also making some very inoffensive videos on TikTok, gaining a slight bit of popularity over time. At school, Cameron seems to have done fairly well. Here he made several good friends, one of which was a boy named John Barano. He and John eventually became best friends, hanging out together a good majority of the time with Tristan. Eventually, though, it came time to graduate. Cameron was now 18 and John was 17. Cameron was planning to go to the Hillsborough Community College and study marketing very soon. As a graduation present, Cameron's mom gifted him with a brand new 2018 Mustang GT. John himself received a Nissan Altima in a similar fashion. The boys loved their cars, a little too much. They really enjoyed showing them off and driving them around the city. However, their driving was anything but standard. Cameron had a dirty little habit of driving over 70 miles per hour on city roads, well above the posted speed limit. He had been given speeding tickets at least once before, but this wasn't enough to deter him from driving down the long, winding roads on the Tampa coast. One day, he hit speeds of over 162 miles per hour on Interstate 75. And it was only a few days after that that tragedy would strike. On the 23rd of May in 2018, Cameron, Tristan, and John hopped into their respective cars to head to LA Fitness and get in a good workout. While they were doing so, a young mother, Jessica Rubenbolt, was pushing her baby daughter Illya down the sidewalk in a stroller. Jessica and her husband, David, had originally been from Ohio, but had just moved out to Tampa after having their daughter. While David was at work, Jessica planned on going on a nice walk before heading over to a family member's house afterwards. Jessica was walking down Bayshore's wide waterfront sidewalk. This is a pretty popular pedestrian path, tourist attraction, and photo spot in South Tampa, promoted as being the longest continuous sidewalk in the entire world with a great oceanfront view. It seemed like a pretty good spot to spend an afternoon, especially to someone from Ohio, a place that doesn't have any sort of view like this. Cameron and the others finished their workout at LA Fitness. Cameron and Tristan hopped into Cameron's Mustang while John got back into his own Nissan to head out. However, Cameron was feeling that urge for speed once again. With his brother in the passenger seat next to him, Cameron challenged John to a drag race down Bayshore Avenue. After all, it was a long, continuous road where they could really clear some uninterrupted distance. John agreed, and the three boys blasted out down the road. This is where the inevitable happened. Cameron, John, and Jessica crossed paths in the worst way possible. Jessica was pushing her daughter in her stroller to the other side of the street. Legally, she had the right-of-way, and she had no way to know that a couple of cars going well over 100 miles per hour, over 2.5 times the speed limit, would be heading her way. Cameron saw Jessica and hit the brakes, but it was all too late. He was going far too fast to slow down to a non-lethal speed in time, only going down to a speed of about 40 miles per hour. Jessica saw what was coming and attempted to push Illya out of the way, but it was already too late. There wasn't enough time to react before Cameron struck her with his vehicle and sent her rolling down the street. Jessica died then and there on the scene. Illya was alive, but in very, very bad shape. Cameron and John dialed 911 as they saw what they had done. All of the boys walked over to the side of the street as they soon faced the gravity of the situation. Cameron called his mother, telling her what had happened, and she quickly left home and hopped in her car to rush to the scene. In the meanwhile, John cried as he faced the reality of what had just happened. Tristan didn't know what to do, unable to deal with the shock of what he was seeing. Cameron, though, reacted a little bit differently. In photos taken at the scene, he seems more calm and collected than the others. At points, he's seen lounging in the grass, looking out toward the two vehicles. When the police arrived, he's seen walking over to talk to them before casually leaning up against a tree and telling them his side of the story. Given that it was his car that hit the victims, this lax attitude absolutely didn't help with his public image. The boys' parents arrived, with John running into his mother's arms and sobbing while he confessed to what they had done. The police did what they could to assess the situation while ambulances rushed the two victims over to Tampa General Hospital. It was too late for Jessica, and she was pronounced dead upon arrival. Illya, however, was alive, although she was swiftly thrown into intensive care. David, Illya's father, was called immediately and told what had happened. He rushed out to the hospital to be with his daughter, lying next to her as he attempted to take in all of the information he was hearing. His wife was gone, and his daughter was in a very dire situation. While he had hoped that Illya would survive, these hopes would soon be dashed the very next day as she passed away as well. Cameron, John, and Tristan were all arrested and taken into jail. Cameron didn't take his new reality very well. While it isn't known exactly how he handled being in jail, it couldn't have been good, as he showed up to court for the first time wearing an anti-self-harm vest, something none of the other criminals brought alongside him were wearing. Cameron had been hit with a $200,000 bond. He and his lawyer were hoping to get the bond lowered to a more affordable $50,000. His lawyer argued that he was a good kid who made a huge mistake. When it came to that, they were surprisingly successful and the bond was lowered. However, that isn't all he wanted. Cameron boldly, ballsily asked for permission to drive again, saying that he needed to do so to attend college. This, unsurprisingly, was denied, but he was given permission to go to college as long as he was driven by someone else. Cameron was bonded out of jail to await his trial. He was slapped with a GPS tracking device, ordered to hand over his passport, and was told not to leave the country, and was absolutely not allowed to have contact with the victim's family. For now, he was out. Ever since Cameron was arrested and convicted, he's garnered a very large online following, mainly on TikTok, where his account blew up to over 2 million followers despite all his videos having been deleted. Many of his fans were women, mainly women who found him attractive. The internet blew up with comments about his eyes, his jawline, and how he was, quote, too cute for prison. Many of the supporters began to follow the trial very closely, monitoring and criticizing any new developments. They saw David and his family as nothing more than a group of people looking for revenge out of sheer anger and grief, ready to throw a young man under the bus for what they considered to be a simple accident. These supporters were seen in a very negative light by virtually everyone, but they still opted to proceed in their support for freeing Cameron. It wasn't too long before it came time for all of the boys' trials to begin. David, husband and father of the victims, decided from the very beginning that he was going to make sure that the boys faced justice. He was determined to attend as many of the hearings that he could and make sure that they were punished to the fullest extent of the law. The judge pointed out Cameron's long history with excessive speeding. Cameron's attorney, John Fitzgibbons, was quick to defend the boys, saying, "I can say at this point that there was no alcohol involved, there were no drugs involved, and the car stopped immediately at the scene." All of the boys were set to get separate trials, and each of them took a very different approach to how they would deal with all the charges. Tristan, not being one of the two drivers, hoped to get off scot-free entirely. John admitted to what he had done and hoped to get some sort of plea deal. Cameron, however, wanted to go through the legal process and fight against his charges to get the lowest sentence possible. John was able to get the plea deal he was seeking. He pled guilty to 2 charges of vehicular manslaughter and 1 misdemeanor charge of racing. He was ultimately sentenced to 6 years in prison and 15 years of probation upon his release. He will also have to do a full 200 hours of community service, with 100 of those hours to involve speaking to young men and women about the dangers of reckless driving. He was required to soon turn himself over to the Hillsborough County Jail. For the time being, though, he was able to get out of jail on a $50,000 bond. His attorney, Anthony Rickman, said, "As you saw, he was extremely shaken up after everything that had happened. John Baranow is a good kid, never an ounce of trouble in his entire life. He's in a situation he's never been in. When we see a tragedy like this, a tragedy that evokes emotion from all sides, it's very easy as a community and society to jump to conclusions and rush to judgment. And in a case like this, I just ask that we not rush to judgment, especially regarding Mr. Baranow." Tristan Herrin was able to get what he wanted as well. While he was originally facing 1 year in jail for a misdemeanor street racing charge, this wouldn't come to fruition. Given that he was only the passenger in one of the cars, he was able to get all of the charges dropped against him in May of 2021. Jessica's father, Bob, was there to oversee the hearings. When asked about how he felt, he said that he felt John's plea agreement was appropriate. He felt that there was much more to be said and done at Cameron's trial, given that he was the actual killer. He said, simply, "We plan to be there." Cameron's trial was all set to be the most eventful, given that his car was the one that actually hit the victims, and both the media and online communities already fostered a good amount of hatred for him. His first hearing would be over a Zoom video conference with the Hillsborough Circuit Judge, Christopher Nash. Surprisingly, from the very start, Cameron expressed an interest in pleading guilty. Nash asked Cameron and his attorney a long series of questions to make sure they really understood the consequences this plea would bring. Cameron, sitting tight and looking pretty professional, simply continued to respond with, "Yes, Your Honor." When asked if Cameron might have been under the influence of any sort of substance at the time, Fitzgibbons once again reiterated that no alcohol was involved. However, he did say that Cameron took medication for anxiety and to help with sleep. In the end, the judge told them that the sentencing guidelines could have Cameron facing a whole 30 years in prison. Still, though, he pled guilty. For a number of reasons, Cameron's big trial continued to be delayed more and more over time for the next several years. One of these reasons was that his lawyer attempted to have some of the evidence thrown out, this being what you could call the black box of his car, onboard records of his speed, distance driven, and other statistics. He said that this was because the police used a flawed search warrant to get this information. While the judge declined this move, it did delay the trial. Both Bob and David pled with the court to get things moving and speed things up so they could finally see some sort of resolution to all of this. David told the court, "I've suffered horrifically every moment. It's nearly impossible to put into words the agony of this legal process." In 2021, it finally came time for the big trial. Both Cameron's family and the family of the victim showed up to the court bright and early to see Cameron's fate, each hoping for a very different outcome. The trial would go on to last for a grueling 9 hours, in which many people would come forth to give statements. Some of these people were Cameron's mother, his aunt, his old teacher, and of course the family of the victims as well. When Cameron's aunt spoke, she enraged a lot of people by trivializing the death of the 2 victims. Speaking of what had happened, she said that boys do things on impulse, and asserted that Cameron was a very nice young man in the end. She said that he feels a lot of guilt and has lost a lot of weight in jail.
And all my years of teaching, boys just do things on impulse. And I believe that they truly believe nothing's ever going to happen badly. And so when it does, like in Cameron's case, it's tragic.
Cameron's mother came to the stand as well, giving statements that people found to be manipulative and subtly spiteful. She complained that, to pay for various fees, they were forced to sell their home at a major loss and downsize to a much more modest home.
Yes, we had to sell our house.
And you moved to another...
And we moved to a
location.
much smaller house, about a third of the size and a third of the value. Well, yes, we had to sell our house and move into a much smaller home.
Due to a clause against racing in their insurance, they didn't get any sort of payout in the end, forcing them to pay for everything out of pocket to the best of their ability. When speaking of Cameron, she remembered back to the day of the crash. She said that Cameron called her crying, saying, "I killed someone." She said that after she rushed out to the scene, she saw Cameron sobbing down on the ground on all fours, vomiting out of sheer shock.
On May 23rd, 2018, less than a month later, I received a frantic, distressed call from Cameron. And he told me he had been involved in an accident. And he said, "Mom, I've killed someone." And I said, no, Cameron, it's just, at that point, it wasn't even clear to me how the accident what had taken place. And Cameron was on his hands and knees, throwing up and crying.
Many noted that these statements greatly contradict his seemingly casual demeanor in the photos and videos taken in the aftermath of the incident. Eventually, it came time for Cameron to speak for himself. While he didn't actually speak on his own, he wrote a statement for his lawyer to read on his behalf as he stood next to him.
To begin, I would like to apologize to the family that lost two beautiful souls. The amount of remorse, sorrow, and regret that I feel is unfathomable, but I could not possibly imagine how you feel. I know that nothing can be done to turn back the clock, but I will and would do anything in my power to fix it. I am so sorry for what I did and what I caused. God is with these two beautiful souls, and I have no doubt that they are at peace. I had lost my faith before the accident, but I brought it back afterwards and was confirmed to the Catholic Church soon thereafter. Along with my family, I will be carrying these two precious lives with me forever and wherever I go. I would also like to apologize to my friends and family for what I put them through, and I could never repay any of them for the support that I have received from them. I always pray for the Reisinger and Ravenel families because your pain must be unconscionable. My life will be dedicated to repaying the cost of the lives that I took, and if given the chance, I will do everything in my power to prevent any fatal accident from ever occurring again.
The trial took a much more emotional turn when it came to the family of the victims. They presented a video over 30 minutes in length that consisted of photos of the victims along with interviews of various family members about how the incident had affected them. Some of them had come from as far as Australia to pay their condolences and attend the funerals. While all of them handled the tragedy differently, they all agreed on one thing: their lives had been changed forever. Finally, it came time for a detective to present evidence in the case. While a lot of the portion of this part of the trial has since been redacted, it's possible to see the portion in which he shows a bit of low-quality CCTV footage from a nearby area showing the boys racing at a high speed. He then shows some text messages, fairly out of context and hard to understand, between the two boys leading up to the race. He then spoke of the onboard statistics from the car, showing the consistent pattern of speeding. Finally, it came time for the judge to speak and hand down Cameron's sentence. For the misdemeanor charge of unlawful racing, he was sentenced to time served. However, on the first count of vehicular homicide, Cameron was sentenced to 9 years in a Florida state prison. His eyes began to widen in shock. On the second vehicular manslaughter charge, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Even with his face mask, you could see the true fear in his eyes as the reality hit him. He was to serve those sentences one after another, giving him a whole 24 years in prison. Ever since the video of the sentencing was released, it has since gone viral and continues to be shared all over Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. While Cameron's supporters expressed shock and remorse at the sentencing they felt was far too severe, those who disliked Cameron were happy to see the look on his face when he heard the news. The judge felt that Cameron was completely responsible for his actions and should be sentenced accordingly, but he still allowed a window of time for his lawyers to file an appeal, which they did shortly after. Andrew Warren, a state attorney who has since been fired for reportedly being too lenient on crime, left a voicemail for Fitzgibbons, criticizing the sentence, saying, "Hey John, it's Andrew Warren. It's about 4:30 on Friday. I just wanted to reach out and follow up after yesterday. Yes, call me at your convenience. Nothing urgent. Just wanted to share my thoughts on what had happened yesterday. I tell ya, I was, surprised and even disappointed by the sentence. I thought it was excessively harsh. But just wanted to follow up with you when you get a chance. This is my cell phone. Call me at your convenience." John Fitzgibbons was able to use these comments to show that even the state attorney agreed that the sentence was too harsh. This was mainly what the whole appeal hinged upon. Even while using this defense, he criticized Warren for being too weak to intervene at the sentence himself, saying, "Warren didn't have the moral fiber to tell the court what he really thought when he and his office asked for this very heavy sentence." Andrew Warren defended himself by saying that he was merely doing his job and trying to give justice to the victim's family as per his job. However, in the end, the appeal was rejected and the sentence was upheld. Cameron and Fitzgibbons were left with no way out. It was all set in stone. Cameron was sent to the Graceville Correctional Facility in Jackson County, Florida to serve out his sentence. By the time he's released, he will be in his early 40s. Cameron's online support only boomed in intensity after his sentencing was settled. Many people online launched a slew of different campaigns in order to hopefully reduce his sentence or get him out of jail, none of which today have been successful. The judge had already refused a motion to reduce his prison sentence and sees no reason to rethink that decision in the future. The obsession with Cameron online, mainly from women, is a psychological phenomenon referred to as hybristophilia, simply defined as the phenomenon of an individual being sexually aroused by a criminal offender. It's usually seen in cases where the perpetrator of a crime, no matter how grisly, is an attractive man, such as in the cases of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, and Ted Bundy. Posts with the hashtag #JusticeForCameron came to explode online all over all sorts of social media platforms, mainly using the viral footage from his sentencing paired with sad music, hearts, and crying emojis. They mainly argue that his 24-year sentence was unwarranted, some arguing that he deserved no punishment at all. Oddly, the Arabic-speaking world took a large interest in Cameron. Even now, if you Google up his supporters, you'll see that a huge number of them appear in Arabic. Due to this, some commenters online have theorized that Cameron's friends, or maybe his family, might have been paying overseas bots or subscriber farms in order to overwhelm the internet with support for Cameron and turn public opinion in his favor. There are entire TikTok and Twitter accounts dedicated to spreading conspiracies about how Cameron is not in the wrong at all. Many of them blame John for hitting the two victims, saying that Cameron's car didn't show consistent damage with him hitting two people. They say that John is scum for passing the blame onto his best friend. They say that the police falsified evidence. They say that it's suspicious that nearby CCTV cameras didn't film it. And worst of all, they blame David and Jessica. They blame Jessica for walking across an area that wasn't a crosswalk, although she was found to legally have had the right of way. They say that Jessica must have been up to something because she was going on a walk with 2 bags, 2 apparently being a suspicious amount for an outing. They scoured the victims' families' Facebook profiles trying to find a way to slander them, such as calling them alcoholics because a member of the extended family said he was drunk in recent photos. They blame David for taking Illya off life support when, according to Twitter's best medical experts, she could have lived. They then say that David is receiving money from the government just to work toward taking Cameron down. They even theorize that Jessica was cheating on him with a man with a Mustang, causing him to hate Mustang owners and want to take revenge against all of them. They further slandered David by saying that he didn't even want to marry Jessica and was forced to marry her because of a child, all because he appears to look at her with disgust in one picture, according to them. They said that David must be a liar because he said in court that he didn't sleep for 3 nights, but he appears to be sleeping next to Illya in the hospital because he is lying down. They are often reaching very hard, grasping at very tiny straws. It's a very strange rabbit hole of people who are either obsessed with Cameron or are being paid to paint him in a better light. As of the writing of this video, 3 years after his sentencing, the posts still have not ceased. In fact, the Tampa Bay Times has reported that both the court that sentenced Cameron and the Florida Department of Corrections have received numerous threats from these people. Right now, there are still multiple Change.org petitions floating around with the intent of having Cameron's sentence reduced or having him freed entirely. One of them reads as, "Cameron had no intention of killing anyone. He is innocent, and the US government should understand that he doesn't deserve 24 years in jail. He has his whole life ahead of him. He regrets his actions, which was reflected through his emotions in the courtroom. Everyone makes a mistake. His seems to have faced a much greater consequence than others, but one event in your life shouldn't determine your future. We all make decisions we regret when we were young, but that doesn't mean we have to give up our whole lives to repent. Cameron is an intelligent young adult who doesn't deserve this injustice. You can help make a change to this young boy's life. Cameron needs your help. So please help by signing this petition. You can make a huge impact in someone's life without even knowing it. Your actions can help save lives." Surprisingly, Cameron's mother has spoken out against his crazier supporters, saying that they had an unhealthy obsession with her son and that it made her uncomfortable. Shelby Grossman at the Stanford Internet Observatory has said that the posts online about Cameron are a good mixture of probably genuine support and what she said are, quote, "suspicious activity likened to Middle East digital marketing firms, although not much more detail than that was given." At this point, Twitter has suspended about 900 accounts from Cameron's obsessive supporters, given that they often violated community guidelines in one way or another. They've also erased about 90,000 of roughly 100,000 currently circulating tweets about him for similar reasons. The fans don't seem to have a clear reason as to why they think the police were out to get Cameron in the first place. After all, being a rich white man, he doesn't really fit the stereotypical profile of someone who they say would be targeted by the police. On the contrary, he more fits the profile of people who are said to be protected by the police. Individuals may have their own answers on this topic, but there doesn't seem to be a broad agreement as to why he was supposedly targeted in the first place. In the end, Cameron isn't going anywhere. His supporters can send him all of the love letters they want. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out in the algorithm, and hey, feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. In celebration of 500k and by popular demand, I have a merch store up now too as well. I only have a few designs up there right now, but I'm hoping to add more pretty soon. Just recently, I've started up a new podcast with 4 of my friends. If you find this channel interesting, I think you'll like that one as well. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media, that's always appreciated, and I also always appreciate it when people follow me on Patreon.
So, I did not get to share my thoughts on this because I forgot and I had to try to, bomb rush to get it done. So, guys, to summarize this up, I'm not going to go into a long string of sentences. Just know, the only types of women, or quote-unquote women, are edgy white women. You know, the types of white girls that love video games, but they have long noses. Not big noses, long noses. Not wide, just long in length. And they're usually the types of women that are obsessed with men like this. So you could say fucked up dudes that kill people and have fun. Yeah. It's the type of shit that they would be interested in. Alright guys, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out. Thanks for watching my content.
Hi, I'm Lucy Christian. I am the voice of Otako Uraraka, and you should subscribe to Neusxanity's channel. Peace out!